Today's guest is Juliet Funt, a globally recognized keynote speaker, appears regularly in top global outlets like Forbes and Fast Company, and is a tough love advisor to the Fortune 500. She is the founder and CEO of the Juliet Funt Group, where she's on a mission to help leaders and teams carve out what she calls white space, those critical pauses that enable clarity and true productivity. She's worked at companies like Spotify, Costco, ESPN, Sephora, National Geographic, and many more to unburden their schedules and reignite the creativity and intentionality behind their work. Juliet challenges leaders to be courageous, present, and thoughtful in how they manage their time, their energy, and their teams. She's a force in productivity, clarity, and courageous leadership, and the author of A Minute to Think, Reclaim Creativity, Conquer Busyness, not business, conquer busyness.
Thank you.
And do your best work. I'm thrilled to have her with us today. Thank you so much. Welcome to the show, Juliet.
Thank you. That's like a 1 for 2. You know, about half the people say conquer business and you go, well, all right. So not quite, but okay.
No, I had to make sure I said busyness. So
You're all good.
You know, I like to think of all the people who come on the show as superheroes, and all superheroes have an origin story. And I definitely want to know the latter half of your origin story, but I'll in case you were going to skip it, I'm not going to let you. So if for people of a certain age, which I am, then you probably know her dad. He was the host of a TV show called Candid Camera. If you don't know that show because you're too young, it's kind of, to me, it's a funnier, softer version of What Would You Do TV show. And you see in the book, you talk about your dad would sometimes fall out of his chair laughing as he was looking at the episodes or editing them. And I was wondering, do you have a favorite episode? And I think you were in at least one.
Yeah, I was. So a lot of your people don't know who Candid Camera is, and you gave them a little bit of a help there, but it was the very first reality television show ever. There was never a show before where real people were caught on camera. That was the novelty of it. So I was on the show twice. I was about once when I was 5 and once when I was 7. And I used to go to my dad's office and he would put out milk and cookies. And I have quite a sweet tooth. So I would eat these cookies and he would interview me. And sometimes he would put it on camera. And the one that is actually on camera, the cookies are so full in my mouth that I'm spitting crumbs trying to have a conversation with him and drink this milk out of this giant mug. So that was a memorable one. And then another time when I was in high school, when a crew was bored and I came to a shoe shop that they were shooting in, and there weren't enough there wasn't enough traffic, so they just said, "Let's catch Julie," and they shot me instead.
I saw the first one you mentioned.
Yeah,
I saw that one. That's the one. What's more important, money or love?
Yes.
And your answer was heart, which I thought was interesting.
Yes, that's a interesting clip because it gave me a sense of the way my dad, I look at it and obviously I don't remember it, but the way that he would interview me, so engaged and having fun. And it is, I think a lot of times about now that I do interviews about how he actually conducted that interview. So you can look it up, Alan Funt interviews daughter, if it's interesting to people. But the show was, an interesting starting point in my own origin story. I in the very, very early days, this is 25 years ago now, when I started being a speaker before I was a businesswoman, people would say, you should be the candid keynote and you should do dad stuff. And I remember this one very famous sales speaker who deigned to give me some of my time, made me follow him in LAX airport because he was on a way to a flight. And that's the meeting time he gave me was, come meet me and you can walk with me from the terminal to the terminal while I get my flight. And he's painting this whole picture of my career living underneath Candid Camera and using Candid Camera. And I don't know if it's just that need to prove yourself when you're younger, but I never really did that. I use a clip or two in speeches because they're so beautiful and so funny and people relate to them. But that's really as much as I had to do with the show. My older brother, Peter, was the one who took over the show.
Right. And so what's been your origin story since then? What's been your journey?
So, I always feel like there's a personal and professional mixture there that is the right answer to that question. So I'll just kind of give you all of it. When I was in my 20s, I was a theater person. I thought I was going to be an actress. Then I did 7 years of improv comedy. And right around my 30s, it felt like this is not who I want to be. But it did install in me some really great stage chops that I will be grateful for the rest of my career. And then in my early 30s was when the real exploration began of, I don't think this is working for me. What's going to happen? And I was volunteering at a museum, actually the Holocaust Museum in LA. And I met a professional speaker, this nice man named Scott Greenberg. And he said, I do this thing where I get up and I'm not a character. And this was what was really fascinating is I'm not acting, I'm me and I'm just sharing. And I watched him do that. And then a few years later in my day job, which was events and meeting planning, I started hiring speakers. And those two things kind of came together. So I thought I could do that. Started in youth and education, did high schools and then colleges. And then as I was in colleges, I started talking about a program called Overcommitted, Overwhelmed, and Over It, which was for high school and college students who were too busy. And that was the moment where my audience kind of found me. Teachers, parents, people in the audience standing in the back while I was talking to the kids would come up and say, we are also too busy. And do you have adult versions of these programs? And so that was really the beginning for me of all of it. I finished doing youth and education around that time, and it's been exactly 25 years that I've been a corporate keynote speaker. We started our company, JFG, which is Juliet Funt Group, 13 years ago. And I wrote the book with HarperCollins 4 years ago. So those are really the main gates, I would say. And then I'll give you one more gate that we just talked about is a year and a half ago, I started working with the military. And I find that this is an absolute pivot point in my career in terms of learning a new level of passion for the work that I do and feeling extremely engaged for reasons that I'm still figuring out. So I would say those are the main markers on the timeline of how I got here.
Before we get into all of the really good stuff, I understand you really missed your calling because you could have done the voiceovers for the TV and radio commercials where they give the disclaimers at the end because you apparently you have the ability to talk really fast.
I do. The funniest version of that is I used to do a bit called the fast day. I don't really do it much anymore, but it was a hyper speed fast forward day in the life of a busy office person. So you wake up in the morning and you check your email and I would do it very fast. And the funniest version of that is Global Leadership Summit, which broadcast to 80 countries, showed me the version where they dubbed me in Spanish. And so I'm like, not only am I talking really, really fast, but I'm talking really fast in Spanish. And so that's, that used to be a big part of it. It's funny how, I don't really know how to say this, but my whole career, I was the funny speaker. And then in my 40s, I kind of became the smart speaker. And then there is this moment where your consultative expertise starts to get stronger and stronger. And it fights a little bit. I don't know if anyone other than me is going to understand this, but it starts to fight a little bit if you have comedic talents. Mm-hmm. Because you can't really be too funny and then say, come and trust.
But seriously.
But trust me with your company and your strategic planning and your future and more money. And so I have found that to be an interesting balance coming out of improv comedy and my roots. I'm just preparing now for Global Leadership Summit, which is the largest leadership event in the world. I mentioned it before, and I'll be doing it for the 4th time. And the way that I sort of solve that is I allow myself some funny bracketing where I'll do an opening and closing story that have comedic elements. And then in the middle, I'll go deep on the consultative content. But it is a very strange mix. And I don't know if others find that to be challenging, but I really do.
I've been lucky. I think most of my sessions are 2 days long. And so I have to interject comedy or otherwise they fall asleep because we're talking project management. So I wake through the comedy. So you talked about, writing the book 4 years ago being one of those kind of key moments. What really triggered you to write the book?
Well, honestly, it was sort of a book intervention. There were 2 gentlemen that took me to dinner and sat me down and said, if you don't write this book, somebody else is going to, because they were fond of my work and they saw that I was probably waiting too long. I'll tell you, I'm glad I waited as long as I did and not longer, because when you join the speaking world, I joined National Speakers Association, I'm guessing 22 years ago. I don't do that anymore. I don't go there anymore. Wonderful organization though. But it's about 20 minutes into being a professional speaker where they start saying, you should write a book, write a book, write a book, write a book. And you're going, I don't even have, my speaking outfits chosen yet. I barely have anything to say at this point. But it is a funny pressure of write a book, write a book, write a book from the very beginning. And I was very lucky. I had 3 children back to back that were all 2 years apart, and I had no time to write a book. So I was doing my work and I was being a participatory mom who didn't want to, outsource my parenting. And that was a really nice 14-year chunk that just took up all the time there until the kids started getting older. So it was a beautiful forcing mechanism of not taking on the additional project. And then when it was time to write a book, I actually had something good to put in a book because I had spent 20 years of my life teaching people and hearing stories and honing my material. And then, of course, the process of writing the book then further tightens things in ways that you can never imagine after you do 100 edits of something. It's just beautiful the way you come out at the end. And then it's been 4 years, so there's all this content now, especially military content that's brand new and keeping us excited and interested. We met last week with the DEA asking us to help them with this fascinating project. And so they're just new branches continue to open if you're a curious person and if you like solving puzzles. And I really think that consulting to me is solving puzzles and just helping people have a thinking partner for the myriad of problems that every business is just a pile of problems. And you're just looking for a good thinking partner to help you through that. And that's why it's not boring because it's always a new thing every single day.
I'm the same with my job. I love my job, so it's never boring. It's just exciting to go to work every day. I mentioned white space in the intro. And for listeners that may not know, how do you define white space?
All right. So we define white space as time without assignment. It's the open, fluid time that used to be in between things in life. It's the unplanned moment, we call it a strategic pause. It's the moments in between. We don't live in a world anymore where those pauses really exist because anytime there is a pause, there is a phone handy to just suck up that little pause, or there's anxiety handy just to drive you into the next thing. And what's happened is that the beats of life have become very compressed, where it's just action, 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 and it's not open where there are pauses in between. But when you do learn how powerful those pauses are, and I could talk to you for a whole half hour about ways to use the pause, there are beautiful immediate benefits to people creativity, to work teams, to the objectivity you can have about your projects, and to your own focus and professional sharpness. Because the brain is not meant to go all day long. It's meant to have some oxygen. And so when we teach it, we analogize it to if you're building a fire. I often open with a story about this, how I grew up in Manhattan and never learned how to build a fire, but finally somebody taught me. And you're supposed to have all the right ingredients, like good fire starter or pine needles and the right kind of wood, but you also need one pivotal thing without which everything will fail, and that is you have to have space in between the combustibles. And that is what draws a tiny spark into a flame, and that is what oxygenates the fire. And we believe that human beings are the same, and work teams are the same, and projects are the same, that they need margin. And that's what we teach. And I happen to have the interesting cred of holding the trademark for the word white space. So we've been teaching it that long. So that's a big part of our work. And, it's always misperceived. Always. I was on a call just yesterday with some gentleman who was saying white space in one sentence, and then in the next sentence talked about how important recuperation is for people. And white space is partially a recuperative tool, but in the book, only 25% of how we use white space is recuperation. There's also white space for creation of ideas and white space for strategic introspection. And there's a lot more that happens in the pause creatively and innovatively than just I take a rest and I feel better. That is part of it, but that's only part of it.
Was there a moment in time what triggered you to think I had this pause and it was really beneficial? Was there a single moment, or it just came to you over time?
I think that, they always say you teach what you need to learn. I am a very energetic, hyper, and sometimes anxious person. I am the least likely person in the universe who would come naturally to the strategic pause. And so I think that when you need it so badly, you appreciate it when you get it. And so it is precisely my lack of naturalness with pausing that makes me the perfect mouthpiece for the pause. And one of the stories that I talk about in the book that really deepened this is when the babies were little, we did something that all grandparents hate, which is we lay with them every single night until they fell asleep, and we just would sit with them. And so this is 3 kids back to back, and there's just a lot of hours. I calculated the hours someday. It was like 300,000 hours I'd spent lying in dark rooms waiting for people to fall asleep. And it was without a phone, without a pen, without any light. The baby doesn't need anything. You're just holding a hand. And my mind was so free in those moments. And there would be the sort of the first kind of layer would be just garbage from the day, like, did I send that tax thing in? And then it would start going downward and inward and outward to, how am I doing in my life? And what kind of parent am I? And what do I really want to do at work? And what really do I feel like I'm doing and I don't want to do at work? And it would just go in so many different creative directions that I would always leave the room as soon as the baby was asleep or the child was asleep, running for a pen or a pencil, because so much had been ignited in that vacuum of space. And so it just over those years, it really deepened in me as an awareness that when I am forced to be separated from stimulation and activity, that amazing things happen for me. And I also have a habit personally of taking little white space sips throughout the day, which is sometimes the very best way to do it for busy people. And I swear to you that it could be 6 seconds and I feel better afterwards. It's so powerful so quickly when you just stop the whole thing and just take a minute.
Yeah, I think that I was going to ask you about this later, but I'll bring it up now. You talked about kind of a forced pause when you were forced to lay there with your kids and help them get to sleep. But then later on, you talk about, I think, a guy named Tony. I just remember he was a really tall guy.
Kalanka,
And,
yeah.
And he was preparing to negotiate this really important deal. And he scheduled himself 6 sessions to conduct research and have conversations. And that wasn't a forced pause. It also doesn't mean the pause has to be no activity. But I do wonder, help me understand the difference between what he did and just filling space in our calendar, because that's also something we want to try to avoid, right? We want to create the white space that we can then do things with.
Yes. So the basic premise of the Tony Kalanka story, who is 6'6", is that thinking is not a business tool anymore. We go to work and we do, and we go to work and we tech, and we tech and we do, and we tech and we do, and we touch our technology. And this man, who's always been very inspiring in the times that I've talked to him, was very clear that the pause sometimes is a place where you just really think and chew on stuff. And there are numerous examples in the book. I mean, Bill Gates used to take 2 think weeks every single year where he would go to a cabin and just think, and they would bring him orange crush soda and his meals, and he would sit there and just read and think and think. And so the Kalanka story is sort of in that vein where we don't step back to think about the work that we're doing. And he did. He knew that he had this big moment of a proposal. He knew that he couldn't just do his way to success. He had to think his way to success. So he created these sessions with others, because white space can be collaborative, to just walk in a room with whiteboards and no agenda and say, let's let our minds be free and see what we come up with. And he saved the company millions and millions of dollars by the way that he crafted that final outcome. So I believe that our minds need that liberty, and that's part of the application.
Yeah, he gave another example of how in the old days, you might walk into your boss's office and they would have their shoes up on the desk and be staring out the window, and they were thinking, and it was beneficial. But today that would happen, and you kind of, you probably think, this guy's not working. What's going on? Why is he being lazy? Because I think in most organizations today, being busy is equated with productivity and adding value. But you talk about the hidden costs of busyness.
Yes, well, there are numerous costs for the lack of that thinking time. And I think it's more likely these days, I suppose, if you walked into your big boss's office and they were actually doing that, you'd probably leave them alone. But if the managers walk in the floor and someone would be sitting at a desk who doesn't make CEO money and they're thinking someone's going to say, "Hey, dude, what you working on? What you working on?" And they're going to pull them out of that beautiful thoughtfulness. They might be about to create a prototype that changes the nature of the future of the company, but you do not see them typing or walking or moving or filing or shuffling, and so you think that that's wasted time. Now, there's a neurological part of this too, which is if you looked at an MRI scan of your brain during someone who's in a strategic pause, it is bright, it is colorful with insight, introspection, memory, activity, creativity is firing in there because there's room to fire. So that's a huge belief system of mine. But that one person sitting at their desk, they don't have camaraderie or permission to just take a minute to think. It's just not really it's not really how we equate. It's not what we think of as productivity. I have a wonderful friend named Christine Cashin, who is also a comedic speaker. And she says, when you're very stressed, you should get a clipboard and you go, she calls it on a mission to nowhere. And you just walk. And you walk very fast and you have a clipboard and you look officious. And so you look like you're going somewhere. And so, but a lot of the day, what's funny to me about that bit is it's a great little stress management comedy piece, but it's how many times all day long are we going on this performance art, performative mission where we're not really doing anything. We're just looking busy. And so that I think that's a big part of the problem in modern work. And when you say hidden cost, that's what I was trying to remember. One thing I wanted to say, there is a gigantic financial cost as well. And I will tell you that one of our specialties when we work with companies is we do diagnostics to uncover wasted payroll. And that is the payroll going to work that is not mission related. I will tell you, I came back a couple weeks ago from Texas. I did a speech for 665 middle managers in an accounting firm. They had $29 million of annual wasted payroll. What is that? That's stupid emails, stupid meetings, stupid reporting, dashboards nobody looks at. It's all the low value work that clutters up our day. People don't measure it, so they don't change it. They don't believe it's really a problem. And they believe that AI can solve all of it. But I think what they're missing, in my perspective, is that AI and humanity is going to be a two-legged race. We're both in this together. So we got to work on the behaviors that are aggregating all that waste in addition to the tech integration. And I think we are woefully ignoring this part of it.
Yeah, this first thing AI popped in my head when you were talking about that. So for a technical person, I don't think I'm anti-AI, but I'm pro-people. And so it comes across as anti-AI at times, but because I do think people matter. And to your point, it's a two-legged race, right? You need both.
That's probably a whole other podcast. Yeah. This question of how, and it is funny how every single conversation, I think naturally now, when I have an operational efficiency with a conversation with a company, they always want to find out about the AI integration. But if productivity is a pie chart and it's behavior, process, technology, almost every executive I know just forgets the lower third and they're just pinging back and forth between process and technology. Behavior is a giant piece of whether things go well or not, and they just don't see that piece.
No, absolutely not. And in not having that time for white space, it also takes a personal toll. I mean, I remember you told the story about the lady, I think Mindy, who was what you call the peanut butter manager, who basically said a promotion at work equaled the demotion in her life.
Yes. And I still stay in touch with her. She is called the peanut butter manager because her work after that promotion became so crushingly busy that she began to work with a jar of peanut butter and a spoon on her desk just so she could keep her blood sugar up because lunch was like a pipe dream that never ever happened anymore. And we've been called in. I can tell you, we were called into a large retail clothing firm because two different people in the same innovation department had a stroke within the same year. We see companies with staggering turnover issues that are completely ignoring the human behavioral piece. We see burnout being handled only at the latest part of the burnout spectrum where people are already in such pain that the only answer is therapy and leave. Where if you went upstream from all of that, you could look at so many predictable behaviors that would make people more vital. And, I think honestly, in the first 20 years of my career, I made a terrible mistake that I I was focused on burnout curing for the sake of curing it or fixing it, thinking that that was enough for senior leadership. But in the last years, we've really helped them connect the dots of this is connected directly to the revenue and growth goals that you care about. These are the people that are supposed to be driving those revenue and growth goals. So we don't solve burnout or address burnout for burnout's sake alone. We address burnout because that's the fuel. The people are the
Right.
fuel.
A minute ago you were talking about the importance of people, and you said you had the pie chart, you had technology, people, and process. I think that's how you're putting it. And I know when I teach classes or work on projects, everybody wants to focus on when you say project management, people think process.
Yeah.
And okay, that's true, but people do the task. So there's a really important people aspect of that, which I always make a point of talking about. And you kind of have, you describe it similarly, I think, in the book by all bricks and no mortar, right?
Yes. So process, so all bricks and no mortar is applicable in a lot of places. So I'll break it down, which is bricks are the main components of work. They are the main components of transformation, let's say, as an example, which is a big part of place where that metaphor plays. Company wants to do M&A, integration, digital transformation. What do? They do a project plan, they do Lean Six Sigma, they do tech stack, they do new financial plan. Those are the bricks, the big pieces. But the mortar is how human beings will behave in that newly created environment. Will they be sharp? Will they be focused? Can they make a decision? Do they know how to write a subject line? Can they conduct a good meeting? And that piece, the mortar, is what holds everything together. And that's the piece that we keep skipping. And I'm afraid that with AI's new influence, we're going to be skipping it even more than we were skipping it before. But it is an ultimately vital ingredient.
I think we're on the same page here because people matter. And that's what you're saying is the people side really is the mortar. And you can have the most strongest bricks in the world, but if you can't have fasten them together well, they're not going to be a very stable foundation. So
Right. And I think it's interesting as I hear you say that, I think, that what you just said, you said the exact phrase was something like the people matter. And I think that always gets co-opted by the other side, that it's about their personal lives, that it's about people matter and we should give them balance and we should
the empathy piece.
happy.
Yeah.
And I could talk for a long time about the empathy gap between leadership and people, but when you say people matter, the little translation machine that I would like to run for the CEO and the CFO is people matter to revenue and growth, not just
Correct.
people matter like people matter because we should be loving and nice to people. But that thing that you stay up all night wishing were true regarding revenue and growth, the people matter to that. That's the real connector that engages senior leadership.
100%. That's what I mean when I was talking about the people and process and project management. It's because people do the work. And so I need to know how to talk to them, what motivates them. And of course I care about them and want them to be healthy and do well in their personal life. But I totally agree with what you're saying. Is people matter in the business to what you're trying to get accomplished.
Yes. I mean, I'm just writing some new material right now about a topic that we were previously calling leadership gluttony. And we feel like that's not going to really go very far since leaders are the people that buy our work. But leadership overreaching, let's say, is responsible for so much downline misery and bottlenecking and clutter. And it's the simple phenomenon that most leadership teams choose too many individual projects, plans, and initiatives for every single year. They don't have facilitated instruction on how to choose between them, so they just choose all of them. And then that weight, that too many rocks in the rucksack starts going down the chain. And yes, people are burnt out and exhausted, but they also are unfocused. They don't have clear direction. They can't really get the hose has got too many holes in it. All the power's going out. So, there are many, many places where if we could get senior leadership to see the simple ways that they could alleviate pressure and then allow that to trickle down, it would accelerate everything that they care about.
I think that you bring up a good point because in general, I'll take it back to my world and project work. If I'm working with a group, I'll always say, well, how many projects do you work on at a time? And it might be 10 or 15. And then I say, how many of them are top priority? And everybody laughs because they all are top priority. And that's kind of what you're saying And the point is, if they're all top priority, none of them are, because they're all the same priority. And now you have, I don't know what to work on. They're all supposed to be the same. And so to me, it would be taking that step as a leader saying, listen, we'd like to do them all, but we know we can't. Let's prioritize these and see what's the biggest ROI to the company, and let's apply the team there. And then with the time they have left, let's fit in the other projects. But people don't seem to do that. They want to your point, they just want to put everything on the plate and say, okay, guys, go get it all done. Like motivation is going to fix it.
Yeah, I mean, I would maybe push back playfully on the word prioritize, because I think that it is a difficult word. I think prioritize implies to people that you have 10 things and your job is to put them in the right order and then attack. The word reduction is to have 10 things and then get them to 6 before you put them in the right order. And that is the missing piece. That's the thing that we spend so much time developing in leadership, is when you have a reductive mindset, and reductive does mean another thing in the English language, but here we're talking about math. You are first, and this is so important as we start to get to strategic planning season, you're cutting, you're stripping away, you're vendoring out, you're postponing, you're shrinking in scope, you're opening up cadence, you're getting weight out first, and then you're figuring out what to put in your prioritization stack. And so I think that's a really important distinction. We say reduction, prioritization, improvement, 3 different things. This is making the pile smaller. This is putting the pile in the right order. And this is making things within the pile better, but does not add to or remove from the weight that people experience. So all very small distinctions, but I think important within the conversation.
I think that's a good pushback. Now, you also talk about Thieves of Time in the book, and what are they, and how can you spot them?
Sure. The Thieves of Time came out of our research. This is in the first 7-8 years of my work, where we studied busy people, and we found that there were actually 4 main drivers that contributed to professional overload. But the funny thing was that every single one of them was a good thing that had simply overgrown its pot. There were no bad things on the list. It was drive, excellence, information, and activity. But in the age of overload where we live, drive very easily becomes overdrive, excellence becomes perfectionism, information becomes information overload, and activity just becomes frenzy. And so what happens is that these core drivers, which occur in people and also in organizations, push a sense of kind of frenetic urgency into everything. They encourage more low-value touch points out of all the frenzy that they build, and they actually can keep us from doing high-value work. In fact, we didn't talk about this, but if any of your listeners want to write to me, maybe we could figure out some way to do this. I'll give them a developmental assessment on the Thieves of Time so that they can figure out what are their own dominant thieves. We could figure out something on the show page or at the end if we want,
for sure,
of how to do that.
Definitely.
We have that assessment, we give it to teams, and then they can discuss, as any other DISC or Myers-Briggs, there are variations between people and they complement and don't complement each other. Drive and activity are the motion thieves. They want to go, 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 go. And excellence and information are the stationary thieves. Excellence wants to stay and just perfect. And information wants to stay and just research. And so if you have a drive leader with an information person, they're going to be pulling against each other. And there are interesting relationships between those thieves as well.
As I was writing that down, in my notes, there was analysis paralysis, how I like to think about let's just get better data. Because and that's one of the killers in project work, is because people say, well, if I'll just give me another week, I'll have even better data. Well, who doesn't want better data? But at some point, you gotta cut bait and start doing something. You never have perfect information.
There's a moment, right? There's a moment where you have to actually start. I absolutely agree. And the perfectionists have the same problem. I mean, I am a dyed-in-the-wool, hardcore perfectionist. I'll tell you a funny story. I used to do a joke on stage that said that I was such a perfectionist that I was CDO, which is OCD with the letters alphabetized. And then the funny story of that is 2 years later, I was actually diagnosed that I do have OCD. And I never knew that. So that was a joke I was playing on myself for years. But that tightness, that tightness is the opposite of motion. It's sitting and waiting and getting it just right. And it is paralyzing you from forward motion. So all the thieves manifest in different ways, and all of them have assets and liabilities. I mean, drive is a beautiful thing that propels you forward. I love my perfectionist brethren and their attention to detail and specificity. I think it makes the whole world of work beautiful when the pieces are like that, but then it overgrows and overgrows. And they all do. They all overgrow their pots.
Now, earlier you mentioned sometimes even a 6-second sip can help you for a strategic pause. So how do you create those?
So we use a tool called the wedge. And I think if this is the one thing that your readers, listeners walk away with, and when we're golden today. So the wedge is a piece of open time, a little piece of white space, and it's inserted in between two things that would have been connected, and it's just opening and separating. So in between this podcast and walking out to go check on my family who's home for summer, I will take a little second. And I'll just maybe digest, or maybe I'll think about what happened between us, or maybe I'll prepare for a second. I'll try not to just leap to the next thing. In between a meeting and a meeting, we insert 5, 10, and 15-minute wedges so people can prepare, or maybe be a human. Maybe you need to pee or eat or do a human thing, or maybe you need to look ahead to prepare for the next meeting. It can be a 1-second wedge between a difficult question and your response. And we're just opening and separating, opening and separating. I love to do this when I walk off of the gangplank. I don't even remember what you call it. The thing that connects the airplane to the terminal, the
Tarmac.
the thingy.
And yeah, I know what you're talking about. The gate, the jetway.
Jetway, yeah. So I walk
Yeah.
off of that. I try not to just run to the next thing. I'll try to just pull over, like pull the car over for a second with my rolly. Okay, I'm in Kansas. Just a little second. And what starts happening is you just regain your stability. And that's what I was talking about is get a menu before you open the menu at a restaurant, just close it for 1 second and just arrive. Or when you pull in the driveway and you turn your keys off before you walk into family, just take a second to allow work to stay in the car and just leave it there and make that transition. There's a billion examples of where the wedge allows you. And I think this is really the utilization of white space that feels doable for human beings. That executive stretch of, I'm going to schedule 30 minutes of white space on my calendar every day. It's a nice idea, and some people do it well. I can tell you how I do it, but it's not that realistic in the way that life works. What's more realistic is these wedges, and they are so powerful.
I think a couple of examples that you gave in the book and that resonated with me is the wedge between reading the email and responding.
Yes, that's a good one. Yes, that's a good one.
And then, I always ask at the end, what do you want people to take away? And you just answered that. And for me, I was going to say, I would love people, if I can give them a gift, it would be the gift of these pauses, or what you call
hallway time.
Hallway time, yeah. Because because I know on the company that I'm working with right now on a big project, I've been on for 4 years, and we're in one meeting and it runs over and we're late to the next meeting, and it's zero. Not only is there no time to pause, you're already jumping in the middle of the next conversation, which is tough.
Well, let's actually break that down from a corporate risk perspective, because first of all, I need to come to that company wherever they are and help you with that, because that's terrible. But the commonality of meeting to meeting to meeting is so normative that we don't even really break down how terrible that is for getting good work done. So let's say you have a wedge, I'm going to explain to you what happens if you do have a wedge, and then we can infer what happens if you don't. Let's say you have 10 minutes between every meeting, not including your physical transition time. You can look back at the thing you just finished. You can enter your notes so you don't have a pile of notes at 5 o'clock. You can think about what went well, what did I learn? And you can also sort of think about how to keep that project or relationship best going in the future. All of that processing happens in the wedge. Then the human recuperative moment I've mentioned. But most importantly, preparation, really sitting before the next meeting, especially if you're in sales. Who is this person? What did they say last time? What are they like? Is my physical Zoom background and lighting good? There are 100 things to think about before you step into a sales moment or any kind of meeting that make the meeting so much better. And what's funny is we fill our days with these meetings because they are our work, and then we do nothing to optimize them. So you can see with all of that, now remove all of it. Now have 9 meetings back to back with none of that thoughtfulness, none of that processing. You are barely present for the first 12 minutes of every single interaction because you're doing all the processing that you should have done about the last meeting. You're trying to catch up and arrive at the place that you physically are, but your head's not there yet. It's just really a disaster for getting the money out of the meeting. Whatever the meeting is worth, you're wasting, 50% of what I say, you're wasting like 20% of it at the front and back end every time.
And it's tough because, this is a big Fortune 50 company. And so there's always meetings, it's global. So there's meetings that are all in the morning or 10 o'clock at night. And it's just, but during the day, they're just back to back to back. And it's not uncommon to have somebody say, I'm sorry, I'm late for my next meeting. I got to drop. And this meeting hasn't even finished yet. So, and I don't think everybody says, oh, well, they have all these transcription tools. Well, they got to get a lot better because I go back and look at the transcripts and I'm like, that's not what that person said. And then I go listen to the video. Oh, yeah, totally got that wrong.
Yep.
So I don't think that's the answer, at least not yet.
Well, let's just play with that a bit because I've never actually talked about this with anybody before. An AI transcription tool is supposed to allow you to be more present in the meeting. To me, that's the best part of it is I don't have to be sitting there writing and writing and writing to get the notes down. But if you have that AI tool taking the job of the notes, your job is to then be actually active and present. Bring your brain and your talents and your acumen to the meeting. I don't believe you can do that if you are going 7 hours in a row with no oxygen. I still see it. It's been 5 years since COVID. I don't know how people are surviving it. We could talk a long time offline about this. It's definitely challenging. So if I'm a leader and I want to implement more white space for my teams, what do you think is the biggest obstacle I'm going to face? What's funny is if I'm a leader, my brain goes a little quiet on obstacles because leaders can do it. Yeah. It's if I'm a middle manager, what obstacles am I going to face? I'm going to give you 1,000. But if you're the boss, there is a very simple way to make this better. You first must do diagnostic work of some kind. We're passionate about that. You have to get outside of your own opinion and anecdotes to figure out what's actually true. And you have to do a DEXA scan of what's really happening in terms of efficiency and time in the organization. Then from that baseline, you begin cutting. You begin learning that tool of being reductive and getting the right weight. And then you teach and you make permission and camaraderie happen around margin and intelligent use of time. I don't think that the formulaic fixing of this is rocket science. I think getting leaders to be willing to fix it and prioritize it is the psychological rocket science. And that's what's so unbelievably hard. If you have a senior leader who comes to me and says, I want to fix this, tell me exactly what to do. There's a roadmap there, but it's just very difficult, especially right this minute where, again, we're going to return to this, where it truly feels like AI is such a combination of seduction and threat that nobody can think about anything else. They just can't. It's Maslow's hierarchy of org change, right? They just can't. They can't get above the threat and seduction of that. And I think that is going to bite us in the butt so hard in 3 or 4 years, where thousands and thousands of human beings have not had any development poured into them for years. And they kind of suck at workflow and they kind of suck at professional discipline, and they're just relying on AI.
I think that's true. Everybody thinks AI is the answer for everything, which it's not. Maybe it will be one day, but it's just not right now. And then you at the top of this, you mentioned that leaders can make it happen because they are the leaders. And you give an example in the book, which resonated. The guy said, if I can't fix this, I'll quit. Mm-hmm. And he fixed it.
Kenton. That's that's a leader who leads from the heart. And there are 3 kinds of leaders. So you can care about everything we've spoken about in the last hour from 3 areas: from the dollar signs, from innovation, and from humanistic motives. And what I mean by that is there are some leaders that are focused mostly on revenue and bottom line. We tend to villainize them, but that is the point of business, is to make money. So that's one angle. We've talked about wasted payroll. We've talked about lack of revenue and growth from lack of people skills. We're talking about all the answers for that person. The innovation leader just cares about patents, breakthroughs, competitive edge. We've talked about how white space fuels that. And then Kenton, the man that you're talking about, is a humanistic leader who just couldn't stand it that 100% of his managers felt stressed every single day at work. And that's where they were. And he couldn't stand it. And so the good news is that these techniques, adjustments, corrections that we've been describing, they serve all three kinds of leaders. If you hear what we've been talking about through the lens of, please let this help me make more revenue and money, or have more innovative ideas, or make my people more satisfied and well and committed, it works all the way around.
Now, you kind of talked about feeling overwhelmed, and there was a quote in the book about Deloitte says, I think 2/3 of today's employees feel overwhelmed. And I think Gallup had also done one, and I did the math. I think it was almost 70% of people felt burnt out, or all the time, or some of the time. So if I'm in that situation and I'm feeling overwhelmed and burned out, and I'm hearing you tell me take a pause, I'm going to say, I don't have time for a pause. How do you combat that?
Okay. So now let's do Burnout 101. I will tell you as a backdrop to what I'm about to say that I'm sort of at my wit's end that senior leaders don't really care enough about this topic. They just can't care about it enough. We all know everyone is burnt out. Nobody's doing anything to fix it until people need therapy. So that's probably a whole other podcast to talk about what do we actually do. And I will tell you, I was talking to a senior leader from a technology firm. He said, I'm just going to make a note because I'm thinking of too many different things at the same time. But he said to me, if I ask for $16 million for servers, they say we'll find the money. If I ask for $20,000 for people, they say we're on a budget freeze. That is the reality of where we are.
Yeah.
So people have to be able to take a little bit of control back. So obviously, I think the book would be helpful. But beyond the book, let's say you are self-identifying as burning out. The most important thing to realize is that burnout is not a personal failing. It's a phenomenon of work. And actually, burnout is defined as response to a professional situation. They don't talk about burnout in your family the same way. The word burnout, the origin of that word, is about a chronic work condition. The next thing you need to know is that you're not alone, and that probably everyone you know feels some aspect of burnout. So just the self-nurturing and love that can come from seeing that you are part of so many people figuring this out right now might be an initial salve of some kind. And then you have to understand that burnout is not a hangover. You can't cure it by taking a beach weekend. It's a condition that has manifested over time in your brain and body, and it will take a little while to unwind. So I have many, many, many tools. I love, from an app and technology side, I love the New Calm app, NUCALM, which is a neural beats app that you use with headphones to just work on your nervous system and actually calming the body. From a behavioral side, in terms of office work, we do believe those wedges and pauses, even if they can be 30 seconds, just try to take 30-second wedges through the day. And then you sit at your desk and you're feeling like the world is spinning and there's lots of what we call in the book hallucinated urgency and people are pulling you in every direction. You use something called a paper anchor. So a paper anchor is just a piece of paper. I use Post-its. And in the morning, you write 3 or 4 things that are the most important things that you will do that day. And this anchors you to what you will do that day. Now, the reactive world will come in and fire drills will come in. But if you're using paper as the guide, it does an interesting thing that's different from using Asana or a to-do list or reminders, because once you enter the world of your digital technology, you're in that complicated world where you're going to be pulled in a million directions and your dopamine stuff is going off and your neurons are getting tired. But there's just something about paper. Just say, these are my 3 to 5 things today, that is ultimately calming. So those are just a couple. I mean, obviously we could go into a lot, but if you're just sort of burnout triage 101, those would be my first responses.
Yeah, there's so many more things I want to talk about, but we're running out of time. So there's one more I would like to address if we have time for it.
Sure.
And so as regular listeners of the podcast know, I'm a huge fan of conversation, and I believe the dialogue is generally better than asynchronous forms of communications like email or text or posting on Slack. So I really loved it when you wrote, some conversations don't belong in a digital frame. They're too rich with emotion, creativity, or complexity. I mean, I was like, I wrote that down, big exclamation points. And you have a framework that that kind of helps with that 2D versus 3D communication. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's one of my favorites. And then I'll tell you about the new cousin that sort of doesn't fit into either of those. So the 2D communication and 3D communication are different. 2D mediums of communication and 3D mediums are different. Your job is to match up the right one. 2D content is simple and yes/no content, like, can you meet me at 3:00? Did you send the proposal? It's fairly simple. It's fairly direct. 3D content is nuanced, or it has conflict or creativity. I didn't like the way you talked to me, or let's think through this brainstorm. It's kind of twisty, right? 2D mediums, email, Slack, IM, texting, direct, simple, written, typed. 3D phone call, meeting. Now, what happens that's wrong is when people start to mismatch. So if you take 3D content, rich content, and you shove it in a 2D medium like email, that's when you get 67 pings back and forth on a long thread that's going nowhere and sputtering out because you've the wrong content in the wrong medium. When you're sitting in a meeting and you've assembled 20 human beings and someone is reading, I sat into, I guess I'm trying to figure out a way to anonymize them, a big sports channel, a sports broadcast channel. I don't know how to not have you know who that is. They had like 40 people in a meeting and they were reading, I kid you not, the upcoming sporting events for the next month, like World Cup is on this date and diving competition on this date. And they're just reading 2D content with all these people sitting in a 3D medium. That's when you're wasting time. So you waste richness when you have 3D and 2D. You waste time when you have 2D and 3D. And I would say the new sort of Stepford child that no one knows where to put is asynchronous communication, where I take out my iPhone and I record a video or an audio and I send it to you and you send me one back. One of my favorite time savers, but it's kind of an amalgam because we have 3D interaction. You can hear voices and maybe you can see facial expressions, but we don't have real-time communication.
Yeah.
It's a fabulous thing to teach in teams because you have this wonderful shorthand now. Like you could raise your hand in a meeting, go, is this a little 2D? Or you could say in this email thread, hey dudes, 3D, let's meet in the conference room at 4:00. And so you snap through exactly what you need to do when you use those shorthands.
No, that's beautiful. I'm going to ask you 3 more questions. They're rapid fire. These are the ones I ask everybody as they're exiting.
This is where I get nervous, is the speed round.
No. These are easy, super easy. Are there any leadership principles that speak to you personally and guide your day-to-day behaviors?
Yes. Control or growth, pick one. That's one of my favorite quotes. And I usually start by indexing on control and then eventually surrender to growth.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
When something bad happens, don't ask yourself, how does this make me feel? Ask yourself, how does this help my future business?
Got to take a different look at it. Okay, I like that. And what's the best book or article you've read recently, and what was the key takeaway?
Oh man, I have so many that, I'm just reading Drucker's The Effective Executive, the old Peter Drucker Effective Executive. I think it's just fabulous. I think people should read it every year. And I guess the biggest takeaway for me is in the Know Thy Time chapter, which is all about time, which I'm a little bit obsessed about anyway, with executive time monitoring, of really writing down every single thing that you're doing as a phasic experiment to concretize what your tasks should be. And I'm actually doing that right now.
Oh, I'll have to check that one out. I know Peter Drucker, but I haven't read that book yet, so I'll do that. So Juliet, this has really been great. If people want to learn more about you or maybe the assessment you were talking about or engage with you, how can they do that?
Yeah. So if they want the assessment, I can give it to them for them or a couple team members. They should just write to my EA, I would say. That's the best thing to do. Jamie, Jamie, at julietfunt.com. And if they want to check out our work in general or get the book or learn about how we can help their companies, julietfunt.com is my name, all one word.
This has really been great, Juliet. Thank you so much for your time
You're
today.
welcome. Thanks for having me.